Everybody listen to We're Not Wizards, because we are the best, and we're not wizards, no matter what anybody says. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for February. That wasn't pronounced correctly, but that's okay because this is the kind of the house that we're living in at the moment, with mispronunciations all over the place. And right, some things are easy to deal with, like say Flick Fleet. That's easy to deal with. Flick Fleet. Easy. Flick Fleet. Simple. Okay? Then you go and look at the company name and you're like, what? And then you try and pronounce it and you go, well, it's Eurydice Games. Easy. And then you say, well, what else can we do next? Could we maybe get the person that's involved in Eurydice Games to come on and talk about it? And we say, yes, but what's he called? His name's Jackson. His second name's Pope. See, there's no problems here. Is there, Jackson?
No, you got all of that right first time.
Take number 57 clip.
We got there in the end.
We did get there in the end. We've actually been recording for 7.5 hours and we're on our 15th cup of coffee. So if things go haywire,
that will explain a lot.
You'll know exactly what has been going on. First of all, thank you for joining us, Mr. Pope. And this has been, I always say this has been a long time coming, but this in particular has been job changes and house moves and Kickstarters have just been getting in the way of us having a jolly good chat. In fact, was it not the case, I think, that you had an unwell child, I believe. I think we both... It's been swings and roundabouts.
That kind of thing happens all the time.
It's been swings and roundabouts, but you're here. We're here to have a chat. Absolutely fantastic, brilliant. But first of all, how you doing? Are you well? Are you well,
yes,
sir?
I'm good, thanks. Yes, I'm very well. So I started a new job last week. Nobody's ill, so all good.
Oh dear. I mean, I wish. Yeah, it was kind of like one of those things. I kind of saw the news today, and it's like we can joke aside and everything like that, but pretty soon people saying, "Yeah, we've not got anybody ill here," is horrifically prophetic. I don't really want to talk about it. But for people that haven't listened to this before, thank you for joining us. The reason that we do this is because we've in our 4th year. We've done over 360 episodes. We're kind of like heading towards, hopefully we're heading towards kind of like not a Dexter type ending, but maybe like a Good Place type end or a Breaking Bad type ending instead. And the other reason that we're doing this is because Jackson likes to use his hands.
You make that sound so dirty.
He likes to get... No, you've made it sound dirty.
Okay, yeah.
You've made it sound dirty. I'm going to have to flip up the rating on this podcast. You've just ruined it already. But I'm not lying in that. You have genuinely gone ahead and just like made physical copies of Flick Fleet to send out to your backers, haven't you? I mean,
yes.
Let's take the time machine back a bit and start off with the first question is, first of all, Mr. Pope, what were you thinking?
Well, I've kind of got previous for this. So I ran a publishing company between 2006 and 2011. And that started making games by hand. I had an idea for a board game. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, but I've no idea how to sell board games, so I'll just make 100 copies by hand and see if I can sell them over the internet. And this was in 2006 when there was no Kickstarter. Board Game Geek existed, but not a lot else.
Yeah.
And so, I made 100 board games by hand, and I sold them all over the world in a year, which was crazy. And then somebody sent me another game, and I made 300 copies of that within a year. And then at the end of that, I tried to turn pro and start getting games professionally manufactured into distribution. And that was, shall we say, a mixed bag. I ended up with 21 distributors across 3 continents.
Wow.
And sold several thousand games, but also lost a reasonably large amount of money and didn't earn any salary for 2 years. So at the end of that, unsurprisingly, I had to get a job. And then I started designing games again, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months after that company folded, and started publishing games again in 2017.
Was that when the tears dried up? Was that when the tears dried up and you went, right, that's it. Back to the drawing board. I've dried my eyes. We're going to do this.
Not far off. I was actually driving home from Bristol, I think, and had the idea for a steampunk sci-fi deck builder. So set in a sort of steampunk universe, but transitioning to sci-fi, but still in that universe, about colonizing the solar system in a sci-fi solar system over like 300 years.
Have you always been this creative? I mean, have you always been this creative? Have you always, I mean, were you an Airfix kit type of a boy growing up? Were you kind of like always kind of like...
I've always been doing something. So I've painted minis.
Yes.
And obviously played those kind of games. I've made decks for like deck builders. I have vague memories. My memory's terrible. I have vague memories of designing a game based on a James Bond hideout when I was probably around 11 or 12. But yeah, I like crafting stuff. So making those 400 games by hand was something I did for fun. I mean, it was great that I could sell them and there were people interested in buying them. I thoroughly enjoyed making them. And actually, I used to play things like Necromunda as well, and I used to make loads of scenery for that. I had this crazy jigsaw like maze that I'd made out of foam core for Necromunda with like platforms and stairs and all sorts. It was awesome. I make things.
So what's more exciting for you? Is it designing the game? Because designing a game, people think about mechanics and they think about the components and they think about the presentation and they think about, a lot of the time the components are usually kind of an extension. I mean, somebody will start off with, well, here's a meeple, and then kind of like if they're doing like a deluxe version or a Kickstarter stretch goal version, then they'll say, well, we've gone into a shaped meeple. When you're kind of putting something together, are you taking into account kind of, well, how do I make this? Or is it easy for you, or do you naturally just like prototype something and then kind of say, well, how can I design the components from there, bearing in mind you're probably going to be making the thing?
That's an interesting question. I guess I obviously like making the prototypes because that's more or less what I end up doing hundreds of. So yeah, I enjoy the prototyping side of things. I usually got half an eye on how you could make that either at hand-making scale or at semi-hand-making scale or at professional scale. And obviously things change. I mean, like with Flick Fleet, there's a sweet spot. I mean, we did make 300 copies of Flick Fleet last year. I did nothing else. And if we'd have doubled that, it would have been pretty hard going. But because, I mean, we were making the boxes literally from flat sheets of greyboard and labels that we had to cut out into the right net shape before we folded and glued them and everything. We were laser cutting the pieces ourselves. That was Paul was doing that in his garage down in York. bagging up all the bits ourselves. I was cutting out the ship dashboard, so I mean it was a huge chunk of work. So there was a sweet spot around 300 where you could just about do it within a year in your own time. Around 700, that would have become untenable.
Yeah.
But to get the pieces injection molded, you kind of need to make 1,500 or 2,000 copies before that becomes affordable. And one of the things I'm really keen on doing this time round is not ending up with a warehouse full of games that I'm struggling to sell, which is where I ended up. I mean, when I ran the first company, Reaver Games, for the last probably 2 years, I was paying £300 and something a month on a loan that I'd got to fund one of the game developments. And I was also paying £10 plus VAT a week on warehousing the games that I had. So I had like 8 pallets of games in a warehouse in York. And I didn't want to end up in that boat again. I didn't want to be sat on a load of stock that I was really struggling to sell.
Sorry, is that a bit of like fear?
So some of it, definitely, yeah. I don't want to end up in that situation again. Because you sat there watching your capital dwindle away is no fun at all. But the hand making I enjoy. Paul likes his part of it, and it allows us to make it at much smaller scale. So we started this company with no 2,000 person mailing list. We haven't been going all over the world to trade shows trying to hawk our game. So we went into it with almost nothing. Which probably explains why our first Flick Fleet Kickstarter funded with 4 hours to spare. Mm-hmm. But it meant that we could turn around to those 300 or 400 people and say, yep, we can make those copies. We can do it by hand. You'll have your copies before we said you'd have them. So we managed to fulfill that early. And at the end of it, we've only got a few copies left to sell on afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, if it had really, really taken off, as you said, it might have led you with a few problems. If you'd ended up, you would have ended up extra expense, having to potentially look at injection molding, potentially having to go, how are we actually going to deliver this? So is it kind of fortunate that you kind of managed to achieve what some other companies would plan as a worst case scenario, that you did kind of just managed to jump over the kind of the funding goal then?
Yeah, so I mean, when we were setting it up, we set ourselves a reasonable funding goal. We thought if we hit this number, we will be able to make those rewards and do it at a small profit so that we're not losing money on it. And that's something that hand-making games really lets you do, because you can't make a 400 copy run professionally. The individual copies would cost more than the retail price. And most manufacturers have a 1,500 or 1,000 copy minimum run, but we could make 400 copies. We could do it by hand. It took a lot of time, but that was achievable and doable and reasonable. Had we doubled that, it would have been tricky. Had we quadrupled it, it would have been okay again, because we'd have been up to the sort of scale where you could get those games professionally manufactured, and maybe go with like a fulfillment company for the fulfillment. So we'd worked out the figures at various scales, but we knew that even if we funded with a pound to spare, we'd be all right. In fact, we ended up just sneaking over the funding goal, and then we had 6% of people whose payments failed. In the week that Kickstarter chased people, 4% of those came back. So we ended up 2% under our funding goal.
Wow, no way. Okay.
But I mean, you've got to do the sums. So we assume Kickstarter say they take, I think, 8 to 10%. So we assumed 10%, and it was actually 8.5 or something. So we ended up with more than we would have got had they taken 10% of our funding goal, even though we dipped beneath it.
So for someone like yourself, the difference between somebody pledging and not pledging is a huge, can make a big difference. A big difference.
That first Kickstarter felt awful. Paul and I were sat there watching the funding total on an almost hourly basis, and it would go up, and then it would go down a bit, and then someone would change their pledge, and then someone would pull out, and then somebody else would pledge and be yes, and then somebody else would cancel. We even had people cancel within minutes of us funding. It's like, this is killing me. The second Flick Fleet with Kickstarter, which we did at the end of last year, we funded in 3.5 days rather than 29 3/4 days. So that one was much more comfortable. But still, you can't help but watch the goal as it flutters up and then flutters down again.
Is it really do you have to like learn to take breaks and kind of walk away and not kind of look at it? Because it's very, very easy to become, even when I run our Kickstarter, there was the temptation to kind of, even though I'd never kind of went through a big kind of growth and drop, it kind of was quite steady. There's always the temptation to kind of continually, just in case, even if you're getting the emails to say if stuff's changing kind of thing. Does at some point you just say, look, I've got to just look away and let this kind of be as it is. I'm not going to really affect it by continually kind of pressing F5 here.
I think that would have been healthy. Sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like you didn't know.
Especially not on the first one. The second one, it was much easier because fairly quickly, I mean, it wasn't funded in 20 minutes or some of these crazy ones where people set like a £20 funding goal, or it's like Restoration Games where they've got a 200,000 or 800,000 target or whatever it is, but they must have a mailing list of tens of thousands of people, so they usually fund pretty quickly. But I mean, we funded in 3.5 days, and it was pretty evident even from the beginning that we were almost certainly going to fund, so it was much more comfortable that time round. I was going to say it was lovely that we had so many people come back from the first Kickstarter, because the second Kickstarter was it was for a reprint of the base game plus an expansion, and we had something like a third of people who backed the first one come back for the expansion and or another copy of the game.
Were you not tempted at the time, because kind of a couple of years ago there seemed to be a kind of almost like a habit, where it became quite popular for people who, even when they were funding a certain way above the target, or for them to cancel the campaign kind of like 10 days into the campaign. At any point when you were kind of swithering up and down in the first campaign, did you ever kind of cross your mind between yourself and Paul just to say, look, let's just finish this early, and then we can come back in a couple of months and, you know, see if the appetite's still there and see if we can fund a lot quicker? Did you ever think about kind of doing that at all?
No, I think we always thought we're going to go for it, and we'll either succeed or we'll fail. But we've set a realistic target for what we're trying to do, and either we'll make it or we won't. And if we won't, then we may well consider coming back and running a second one. But I mean, some of those people who do that cancellation, I mean, some of them even do it after they've funded, because it's not going to fund enough for them to consider it a success. It's like, well, if it hits its funding goal and not a penny over, it's a success for us. So there was no need for us to cancel. We're not in retail, with one exception. There's a chain of like hobby stores in the north of England that carried Zombology, our first game, and now carry Flick Fleet in most of their stores. But because we're handmade, we just can't afford to go into distribution and retail, really. But so sales go through Kickstarter and sales go through our website, and that's it. So we don't need to have huge margins to make it affordable. We don't need to make 5 times our funding goal before it's a success. The funding goal is a success. Anything above that is gravy.
So what do you enjoy about the process? Are you actually enjoying the handcrafting, kind of putting everything together? Because, I mean, and do you uniquely number every kind of box that somebody gets, so they know that they've got copy number, 127, and that's the only one that kind of exists.
Yes.
I mean, right.
It's a very politician's answer. So
it was.
We did a deluxe version of the of Flick Fleet. So for Zombology, we numbered all of them, and we also signed inside the box lid we number it X out of for Zombology 200 and for Flick Fleet 400, and then we also sign it. So for Zombology, I was the designer and Paul wasn't in the company, so that was just me. But now both of us sign the boxes for the deluxe copies. There's usually a little inscription, and you can even, for the deluxe copies, you can get it personalised. So if you want your name or a family member's name or the name of your family, or we've had some great ones for the second Kickstarter, some really entertaining personalisation requests. And so you get a slightly special game like that. The standard ones don't include that, so they just get a blank box lid. But the other big difference between the two is that the deluxe Flick Fleets have some ship details and the name of the ship etched onto the top surface of it, because it's all laser cut acrylic.
Oh, right.
The ships are cut out of like a 5mm thick acrylic. So you've got the sort of the plain ship outline in the standard copy, and then you've got the name of the ship and some gun turrets and detailing etched onto the surface of the deluxe copies.
That's really kind of cool, because I've always, one of the things that Kickstarter do is they do their Make 100 kind of series, and that seems to be a lot of people who are, they're doing small runs of something, so there's no way it can really kind of be kind of manufactured unless it's kind of like a card game, and they can maybe run off a couple of copies to the printers. Are you quite content to run this and continue what you're doing with all the games that you're planning on releasing? I mean, are you wanting to kind of keep the kind of the handcrafted kind of side of this? Because it seems to me that designing the games is important to you, but also it seems the kind of the personal touch and actually the creation of the games also seems to be pretty important to you as well. Yeah,
so I mean that's definitely part of what we like about doing it. So so it kind of depends upon volume. So I mean, we've made 400 copies, 300 and something copies of Flick Fleet last year, and that was pushing it. That was pretty much using up all of my free time. Last year I didn't do any game design. I didn't go to the local games club. I didn't go to the playtesting session that I set up, and that was partially made more difficult by the fact that I had a job that involved a reasonable amount of travel, and so it's quite difficult when you got young kids and you've just gone back from a week-long trip to the States to get a pass to then just go and play games in a pub. It was, so that's kind of doable. If games get more successful and we get more people interested in them, then that kind of becomes untenable, unsustainable. So this year we ended up we're making 800. It's 400 copies of the base game again and 400 copies of the expansion, and we can't do all of that within a year by ourselves. So we've literally just today had the boxes arrive in Paul's garage, and so the boxes have been made for us, which saves us like 15 minutes a game, I think. Because previously we were cutting out the nets of the greyboard, folding, taping them, then cutting out a label net, and then gluing the label on, and then doing the same for the lid, which obviously takes some time. Do you and Paul get on quite well? And have you got kind of like similar mindsets? Because I can imagine if he's sitting there going, "How do we automate this thing?" It's like, no, just make sure your scissors are sharp. Yeah, and your Pritt stick is overflowing. So I was doing most of that stuff last year. Towards the end of the year, Paul started helping out a bit. So Paul's got the laser cutter in his garage, so he was laser cutting all the ships. He was also had all the wooden bits at his house, so he was bagging up the ships and the the laser cut ships, and then we would meet up occasionally. And because I live in Newcastle, which is 100 miles north of York, for those of you who don't know British geography very well, and then I would make the boxes. I would cut out the dashboards. I'd put the rule books and the dashboards in the box, take the bag of stuff Paul had given me and put that in the box, and then ship them. And towards the end of the year, Paul started helping out more with that. Paul works 3 days a week and has a 15-year-old daughter. I work 5 days a week with a reasonable amount of international travel and have 2 daughters who are 2 and 7.
Wow.
So slightly higher maintenance. So I was struggling a bit for time. So Paul took on cutting out the box nets for me and the labels as well. And then I was just physically making the boxes and labelling them, which saved a good 6 or 7 minutes a game. Every little counts.
Did you not think kind of halfway through and just saying, like, next time it's a card game and there's just one card and we stick everything in one envelope and that's how it's going to be called the one card game, and the person that gets the card thrown at them, they lose, and that's the game. Well done. And kind of do that. I mean, is there any time you've went, oh, my fingers are glued together, somehow I've got kind of adhesive sticky stuff in my hair, and you know, and I keep finding bits of ships like in various parts of my clothes, even when I'm at work, kind of thing. When is this going to end?
No, perhaps that shows that there's clearly something wrong with me.
I didn't want to say.
So we get you do find the worst one is actually I got this big tool for rounding corners when I made my very first game in 2006, and I still use that to this day. And you end up with these tiny little sort of 5mm bits of card that are like the corner of a card that's been cut into a nice round circle. So this tiny little, they get everywhere. I was finding those years after I'd stopped using the tool, although I used it again recently for zombology. So that's the worst one, and I don't glue my fingers together, but I frequently cut the tips off them. So I need to get better at not doing that. It stings.
Don't like that.
I can highly recommend not doing it.
I definitely still don't continue to describe it. Already said I don't like it. You don't need to go into any more detail. On the craft side, moving swiftly on to a subject that doesn't involve you cutting off the tops of your fingers. Thank you very much, Mr. Pope. Sometimes what I see is when I'm online, I see kind of people kind of deluxifying games. Would you ever consider doing that? Have you ever kind of like seen a copy of a game and went, oh, I'd love to just take that and just kind of, you know, pimp it up, you know, pimp my game kind of thing?
It's not something I've really done myself. I've made a box insert for my X-Wing Minis collection, again out of foam core, but none of my games I really pimped up myself. I've got a couple of things like my Lords of Waterdeep has the D&D pulls, which are awesome, and in fact years ago Paul gave me the Annie meeples and veggie meeples for Agricola.
All right, cool.
But I've not done any of pimping my own games, as it were. Although I do this thing on Wednesdays on Twitter called Craft Wednesday.
Yes.
And there's quite a few people who join in that who've done that kind of thing. And it always looks really cool. But I'm too busy making my own games to make my board games look better.
If you had the time, would it be something you would consider? Because you mentioned kind of mucking around with like making scenery for Necromunda. I mean, if somebody says, right, here's some materials, what would you like to kind of do? Would it be something you would do, or are you just quite happy just rather making your own games than making other people's kind of better?
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to make my own games. I think that's the stuff I enjoy the most, making funky prototypes, and then hopefully at some point getting them to the point where they're good enough that other people will want to play them.
With Flick Fleet, how did you get the original idea? Because you mentioned X-Wing.
Yeah.
And when I first saw Flick Fleet, the first thing that went through my head was X-Wing when I first saw like the first original pictures. What was the kind of the inspiration behind kind of Flick Fleet when you were first kind of putting it together?
So I think it was actually Paul's idea. I first met Paul when I arranged a blind playtesting evening for my first games company when I lived in York. So I've known him like 13 or something years now.
Wow.
And the whole time it's been through games, although I used to go to his games night twice a week back when I lived in York, and we've remained friends and probably see each other 3 or 4 times a year, sort of on the weekend. Our families get together, and they'd come up for the weekend, his family, and we were out for a walk in the countryside. And he said, I'm pretty sure it was him, he said, wouldn't it be a great idea if you took something like X-Wing and crossed it with like Flick 'em Up or something?
Yeah.
And that was the idea, and that's pretty much exactly where it ended up. So the original idea was just bang on the money. And as Matt Thrower says, it works so well. It's a wonder nobody thought to do it beforehand. It's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, because I loved X-Wing, but I haven't played it in years and years. And when I did play it, what I found was that we'd sort of spend 25 minutes trying to choose a set of ships and just the right mixture of pilots and add-ons and everything. And then the game would last probably 35, 40 minutes. And it's like, okay, so it's now getting on for an hour and a half. And at that point, it's starting to drag a bit. Whereas Flick Fleet, it's pretty much all done in 15 minutes. And so it's a much, much shorter game. And you can play the pre-canned scenarios, or you can build up a fleet like you would in X-Wing.
I just found that X-Wing became a war of attrition. And it was, if it got down to the last kind of couple of ships, and if they didn't have a 360-degree kind of firing arc, you were just chasing each other kind of around the board. And there was a lot of times where I would be playing it with my son, and we would just look at each other and just go, shall we just finish this up? Because otherwise we're going to be here until Tuesday, because, neither of us are going to win. Or we had kind of powers on our cards, which meant I was like, even if I got behind them, then the shots I was shooting at them were kind of like more likely to miss anyway. So it kind of became a kind of a short thing where I was expecting, and I'm sure most people expect this when they play something like X-Wing, that it is going to be kind of flying around the place after each other, kind of dogfighting and stuff like that. And I think it suffers a little bit from a bit of bloat, that it can end up being a case that even if you do get behind somebody, or you do get somebody in the firing arc, there's so many things that can negate other people's actions that you can sometimes feel a little bit useless. Whereas kind of the immediacy of something like Flick Fleet, I think, kind of went back and said, let's have a game where spaceships can kind of shoot each other.
Which sums it up.
Which was pretty much, I thought, kind of like, yeah, exactly. Have you thought of, are you going to continue to expand kind of Flick Fleet? Is that the kind of the continual plan? I mean, are you thinking about kind of introducing even more and more ships? Is it something you're kind of quite happy where it is just now? Or?
So in the second Kickstarter, introduced an expansion which brought in 3 new ships and a bunch of extra optional rules. So there was a ship with a cloaking device, which made it turn invisible and become quite hard to hit. There was a ship that laid mines, which blew up and did loads of damage to areas rather than direct hits. And there was a ship specifically designed for ramming. So even in the base game, you could do ramming as a sort of last-ditch thing. It would utterly destroy you, and there was it would do quite a lot of damage to whoever you rammed. But this was a ship that was designed to ram other ships, so it could survive ramming other ships as long as it wasn't too badly damaged itself. Plus we added in some objective tokens, which were things you could you could have as sort of like targets that you had to race for or stuff like that, and asteroids and civilian ships that would essentially neutral ships that you could be guarding or trying to blow up or whatever. We've got some ideas for another expansion, which will probably be the next thing we kickstart, which is a couple of new alien races. So since we released the game, people have been asking to play it with more than 2 people. It's a 2-player game. It's like X-Wing. It's 1 versus 1. I know people have played it 3 or 4 player. So they played teams A versus B, but there's 2 fleets of ships. One of them's grey, Evil Empire, and one of them's red, the Rebels. I mean, sorry, that sounds a bit Star Wars. Let's take that back. The Imperium and the Uprising. That's what we're going to go with. So your pretty much only option is to play 2 people on one team or 1 versus 1. So the idea is that the next expansion will be we'll bring in 2 new races of aliens. So their ships will be really quite different with quite different rules, but also new colours. So you can play potentially up to 4 players against each other, 4-player free-for-all, or you can still play in teams, and it'll introduce official 2 versus 2 and 3 or 4-player rules, plus loads of wacky alien stuff.
Do you want it to achieve some kind of distribution? If somebody came along and said, right, okay, we want to change the art and stuff like that, but we want to publish this for you and just kind of take it off your hands, would you consider that, or has the previous events, has that kind of put you off and said, no, I want to stay in control of this?
I don't think I need to be in control. I mean, Paul and I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about this. I would like it to be more popular than it currently is. So we by the end of the second Kickstarter, there's going to be around 600 people who've got a copy of it, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of the popularity of a really popular game. I think it's pretty good. The feedback we're getting is very, very positive. So I think it could be more successful, and probably one of the reasons why it hasn't been is that I'm hopeless at marketing. So I think if somebody else did want to take it on, they could probably be more successful than we are. I mean, if anyone was to take it on, they would almost certainly be a larger company that already has deals and contacts within distribution companies and retail and a massive mailing list and everything else you need to be successful on a much larger scale. So Paul and I haven't talked about it much, but I think I wouldn't be averse to that. But if we did another Kickstarter and it suddenly jumped into mass popularity and we got loads of backers, I'd be fine with that too. Most likely outcome is that we'll get another 300 backers.
And it sounds like you're very comfortable with that. That wouldn't be a bad thing if that happened as well.
Yeah, I mean that's doing what we enjoy. It's the handcrafting of the games and getting it in front of people who really want it. So that's super cool as well.
So what have you got planned for next then? I mean, if Flick Fleet gets put to bed for however long, I mean, are you staying within kind of dexterity, or are you looking at kind of other different genres that you want to kind of get involved in? So
there's 3 things that we currently have in some early form of testing at the moment. So Paul's working on a co-op about diffusing bombs, which I haven't had a chance to try yet.
Right.
I've got another dexterity game, which is about alien races trying to build the optimal solar system as a dexterity game, which got some interest on Twitter yesterday just from that very brief description.
I am instantly fascinated by this.
That one did not go quite as smoothly as Flick Fleet. So the theme hasn't changed yet, but the first cut of it was a sort of an action selection game, almost like a worker placement type game. that didn't work at all. And then I had the crazy idea of making it into a dexterity game. And so far, that's been quite a lot of fun. I mean, it's very, very early days. So there's a lot of work still to do on that one, but that's got potential. And at the moment, it's got the craziest board imaginable. So it's got the board mirrors the gravity well of the start of the solar system. So it's got 5 levels. So, you see these two double-layered boards where you've got cutouts to put your cubes in and things like that. Yeah. It's 5 levels. So they start high up, and then as you get nearer to the center of the solar system, they get lower and lower down until you reach the hole in the middle, which represents where the sun is, and anything that falls in there gets sucked into the star and destroyed. But as you get nearer and nearer to the gravity well, the width of the steps decreases, so it's showing the increase in gravity because it's one of those inverse square things, isn't it? So the nearer you are, the stronger the faster it gets stronger.
I've got to wonder if this is about, mechanics, or if this is you going, right, I'm going up to expert handcrafting level and I need something that's going to provide me with a challenge and the potential to maybe lose a finger next time.
It was a really, really difficult job cutting out those rings. I didn't lose a finger.
I bet it was. Do you get like badges? Do you get like handcrafting dexterity? But are you after some kind of badge from the Handcrafting Society? Is there an award that they do? And did you miss out on it last year with Flick Fleet? And then your aim is to then come back bigger and stronger, like in some kind of Rocky training montage. And then you're going to go for the award for next year. So it'll be like, and the winner of the handcrafted award is Jackson Pope. And you've imagined yourself winning that trophy, and that's what you're aiming for. No?
Sounds awesome. Where do I sign up? I might have to make that Handcrafting Society, and then it's pretty much a show, isn't it?
I think you might have to, just like to make sure it runs kind of fine and on time and everything like that, to make sure that you kind of win the first award, that you can obviously handcraft yourself as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Because that would be absolutely awesome.
So when you see me wandering around the UK Games Expo wearing what looks like handmade Rocky 4 belt, one of those massive, but made out of cardboard, not leather, you know what it's all about.
Everyone will know what that's about, and I expect to see kind of Instagram, Twitter, and even Facebook posts kind of all about it. That's what I'm expecting. But I can only wish you kind of best of luck, because you sound like you've kind of like, it's not just like there's a manufacturing go. Because unfortunately this week I have seen a lot of updates regarding manufacturing in another country, and they've not been happy updates. Let me just say, they've been kind of probably not very happy updates. A lot of delays are going to be happening to a lot of games, unfortunately. But it sounds like you've kind of got things sorted out, and you're kind of happy about the challenge and everything that it is. And obviously now you're going to be making your belt, which is going to be kind of good. But if people want to keep an eye on you on the internet webs, where can we keep an eye on you on the internet webs?
Well, I'm most active on Twitter, where I'm Jackson_Pope. You can find us at www.eurydicegames.co.uk, and yet again I've foolishly chosen a name of a company which I have to spell out because nobody knows how to spell it. So Eurydice is spelled like Eurydice, but swap the O for a Y and you're there.
Yes.
So you can sign up to our mailing list there and see our games and buy copies of Flick Fleet. Zombology sold out, I'm afraid. We're also on Facebook at Eurydice Games, and Instagram, I think there I'm Jackson Popey, G, all one word. And that's, I think, all the places I'm available on the interwebs.
And we'll make sure we put the links in the show notes, so we've got notes to show. If you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, Just go to the internet. We've been doing this for 4 years now. Can you believe that? If I'd done shoplifting, I would have been out in 2. But if you'd like to help the show, support the show, first thing you can do is tell other people about the show, because one of the ways that we spread is by manically coughing over somebody else or telling them about us. And you can tell them about our Twitter or our Facebook or our Instagram or even our blog that we do as well. If you have a podcast catcher of choice, then jump onto your podcast catcher of choice and feel free to give us a rating or a review. If you like us even more than that, then consider going to Apple Podcasts and drop us a rating or a review there. If you are going to be giving us a rating or a review, don't give us 10 stars because it makes us big-headed. But don't give us 1 star because it kind of makes us a little bit sad. Give us something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. We're just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average is rather wonderful, rather fantastic. He's handcrafted, he's handmade, and he likes to flick a bit. It's Mr. Jackson Pope. Thank you very much for coming on, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yes, it has.
At last, it finally happened.
It finally happened. Let's just sit and bask in that absolute glory. But there is only 2 more things to do. First thing is to remember, we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Jackson?
Nope. I'm more of a ranger, personally.
Fantastic. And the second thing is to say goodbye. So it's goodbye from Jackson. Say goodbye, Jackson.
Goodbye, Jackson.
As a goodbye from me, remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful, make something handmade, just make anything at all. But until the next time, goodbye.
Bye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.